the two. Hey, what's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Hello, everyone. Okay.
1 second. I'm not finishing up a call real quick. Yeah, just those two cards. We don't.
Hello, everyone. Scotty White of World Combat Sports. Today I have multi-talented PFL two-time mixed martial arts champion, the one and only Lance the Party Palmer. So while he's finishing up a call, hey, be sure to tune in, drop your comments if you have any for the champ. And I will definitely try to address them as the interview goes on. You good, Lance?
Yeah, sorry about that. I was finishing up another call.
Oh, I know you're important, man. It's all good. For those of you that's tuned in, man, it's a pleasure for me to speak with Lance the Party Palmer, man. Two-time PFL champion, professional fight league champion, featherweight division. First of all, congrats to you, man, and thank you for dropping in for the interview.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Man, your history in the sport of wrestling just goes back so deep, man. I read the story about you and your father getting in the sport early. How was that like early on, finding out how good you really was as far as your mentality, man, your confidence and your courage to compete?
I think it was more for me, it was more the motivation, the self-motivation to be great at wrestling. Because when I started, I mean, I played all sports growing up. I played football, soccer, baseball. I took karate when I was a little kid, starting at 5 years old. So I was kind of into all different sports, and I was always a sports guy. I was always into watching sports and learning from pro athletes and wrestling. Just, I wasn't technically sound at wrestling like my younger brother was. He was more of a natural athlete for wrestling. For me, it had to be more work ethic and just pushing myself to be better and always trying to improve and learn. So for me, that was kind of my start in wrestling, was to catch up, because I started when I was 9 years old, and I had the drive and the work ethic, but I didn't have the technique that a lot of the kids my age had, because they had been wrestling for 4 years already. So that was kind of my intro to the sport, and I kind of had to just catch up, and that mentality stuck with me always, just to keep improving and widen the gap from between me and my competitors.
Hey, Lance, you tallied off a record, I believe, at one point in time as a youth. You had like 108 wins and only 2 defeats.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know my exact record since I wrestled as a kid, but I did have a point where, we almost had 100 matches a year in those middle school years, because we would go to 2 tournaments a weekend. We would, there were weekends where we'd get 10 matches in 2 days, and just for experience at tournaments in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Indiana, we would travel all over the place, stay in a hotel Friday night, wrestle Saturday, drive to another state, wrestle Sunday. And that was how we got the experience. And then once we got to the national level of going to Tulsa Nationals, Reno, Nevada, Detroit for AAU Nationals, Iowa for tournaments. I mean, it's something that started as just having fun, because my dad wrestled for like 2 years in high school, and he enjoyed it, and got my younger brother into it, because my younger brother wasn't really as disciplined in the karate thing. So he kind of took him out of karate and just put him in wrestling to burn some energy, basically, at a young age. And then it turned into something serious for us.
Hey, Lance, coming up, you're a veteran now. You're 22-3, I believe. You fought at RFA, WSOP, World Series of fight, WSOF, World Series of fighting, and you transitioned over. What made you transition from the WSOF over to the PFL league and becoming like a pioneer from the first time that they actually kicked this off? Did you get a phone call? That was something that you had on the timeline, or what?
Well, I was a 2-time champ at WSOF at the time, and they were actually the ones that turned into PFL. So I kind of, at first, nobody really believed this was going to be a real thing. They were like, there's no way they're going to pay $1 million to the champion of each weight class and have six $1 million champions, and the checks aren't going to clear and this and that. There was just a lot of scrutiny about it because you've never heard of anything like this in MMA before. And I was somebody who's always been paving my own road. And that's why instead of waiting to go to the UFC after RFA, I signed with World Series of Fighting and immediately had a title fight on short notice with them in 2014 and kind of just, or 2013, and kind of just trickled down from there. I've always been the type of person to not necessarily do my own thing, but I'm not trying to copy other people's paths that they've taken. I've always been on my own path and created my own success through that. So when they said that they were going to start a thing called PFL and have a $1 million prize for winning the tournament, and on top of your own fight purses throughout the season, I was like, I mean, I'll always bet on myself. And if this is something that doesn't accumulate or happen, I have another, I have other routes. I have other ways to be successful. So that was kind of my first thought process, and just believing in the process and the system that they had, and meeting with some of the higher ups in PFL before the first year even started, since I was with them through World Series of Fighting. And I was, I was kind of a vet of World Series of Fighting, being a 2-time champ there. So they kind of gave me a lot of the information and wanted me to believe in it too. So I just took it and ran with it. And, now we're 2 seasons deep, about to start season 3 on May 21st. So we're in a great position right now. We've got a lot of big investors, a lot of, people like Tony Robbins and Kevin Hart and people like that have invested into PFL after it changed over from World Series of Fighting. So it's amazing. They've switched owners. They've done things to keep building it and growing it, and it's only getting better every year. So I'm excited.
And let me ask you this, champ. What prompted them to change over to the PFL format? Because I like the tournament. I like the tournament format. Looking at your tournament, right now, your championship status on the first go round in 2018, you fought, I believe, like in May of 2018 or something like that. And then again in July. And then you fought twice in one night, man, in October. Mm-hmm. And then you had the championship in December. So how was that like for you, being a part of that first time format in mixed martial arts?
It was interesting because nobody's really sure how things are going to play out. You could get injured early in the season and not make it to the playoff. You could get injured in the first fight of the playoff and not be able to fight later that night. So then the person that loses is the lucky loser and they move on for you. There's a lot of things that can happen. We saw that in 2019 playoffs with the welterweight champ from 2018. He won his first fight, but he had a broken hand or an injury and couldn't continue. So the guy that he beat actually retired in the cage. And then an hour later, they're like, you got to fight again. The guy can't fight. And he was like, oh, crap. Put his gloves back on and he was back into it. So it's an interesting thing. In 2018, you've seen it in Pride fighting and back in the day, but that was kind of the Wild West. And to have this happen in the U.S. and be something that's actually sanctioned for MMA, it's a lot different. Like kickboxing will do that, but it's not, I feel like it's not as brutal of a sport as MMA. So being able to do 2 fights in one night for MMA is kind of, it's kind of crazy, but the athletic commissions allow it as long as there's certain rules that go by it. And going through it the first year, you don't really know what to expect. So you kind of just have that mentality. I was in New Orleans for that one, and I was just like, all right, I just need to get through this first fight with no injuries. Ended up having barely a scratch on me in the first fight. And then the second fight was avenging a loss from my last loss that I've had. So it was a great sequence to get to the finals the first year. And then going into the second season of the playoffs, you kind of know what you're getting into. And the people who haven't fought there, or this is their first season in there, they don't know what that's like going into that. So they may not have a process that they go through to get through those fights, or they may not have the correct training camp to be able to train the right way, to be able to do the things they need to do to be successful in that 2 fights in one night. But I mean, I've wrestled 8 matches in one day before. I've done a lot of things with wrestling that's kind of similar. And a fight is a fight. It's a lot different from wrestling, but the mental aspect is very similar. So that's kind of just what I took with me into the cage.
Is there any rules that's different from, just the neighboring organizations like Bellator, UFC that you all cannot do in the professional fight league?
Yes, the main rule is no elbows because they don't want big cuts damaging, because if you can get a cut from a knee too, which I really don't understand that rule too much, because I get it for the 2 fights in one night, but they extended it for the entire season just so there's no confusion with the rules for the fighters. Mm-hmm. So no elbows is really the only difference. But for me, that's a lot of my ground and pound game was elbows. So these last 2 seasons have been kind of tough trying to finish guys on the ground just with punches, and it's just easier to block punches and get away with not getting finished by punches than it is with elbows. You have one bad cut with an elbow, a lot of guys will break or fold, and that's kind of the difference. But that's the only rule difference.
Hey, Lance, speaking of that, first tournament you had in the PFL, you went in there, and of course you faced an opponent in Steven Siler, who basically had over 50 fights, man. Your record is 22-3, so you was going in there with a much experienced fighter. What was your mindset or the game plan for him heading into that championship fight?
Well, we had a history together because I had fought him in 2017 in November, before the PFL season 1 season started, because we both wanted to fight before that happened. We were both in World Series of Fighting right before that. So I had fought him and beat him in a decision, but if you look through all his fights, he's very dangerous. He had like 9 fights in the UFC. Yeah. He's been around a long time. Like you said, he's fought for a while. So fighting him, I knew he was going to be a dangerous opponent, and his way to the finals was pretty crazy that year because he had a lot of crazy fights and the crazy finishes. He got dropped in his very first fight and then submitted the guy right after that. Just like the way he got there was like, man, this guy can't be counted out. He's always in the fight until the fight's over. So I knew I had to fight him smart and not play it safe, because I feel like the more you play it safe, the easier it is for someone to capitalize on you. So I just had to fight smart and take what I learned from our first fight together and add on to that, and it worked out in my favor.
Well, congratulations, man, on winning that first championship in the PFL, and it was a very exciting fight, man. I have to say about wrestlers, you don't come off as a predictable wrestler, you know what I'm saying? But your double leg is just like sick, you know what I'm saying? You act like you throwing that your right hand, and then you duck under and turn the corner so quickly, man. And I know that's years of practice to get to that, but I see you going to the body with the kicks. You have good boxing, solid boxing, and also your ground game, man. Ever since you lost to De Almeida, you pretty much improved your ground game to the point where you go for submissions now.
Yeah.
When did that come about? Is that something you just added an extra layer, or you already had it?
I had it in my early fights, and I kind of got away from my submission game for a few fights because you kind of get this in your head sometimes. And I know even boxers and other types of combat athletes get this too, of just listening too much to what the fans want. And the fans always want like a stand up, knockdown, drag out, bloody mess of a fight. And I kind of tried to get into those wars. And that was when I lost the decision to Almeida, and even the fight that I won to regain the belt back after that. It was not my smartest fight, but it was a fight that I felt the fans could have more fun watching, because we just, we stood in the center of the cage and we countered each other and threw punches, kicks. We had a few ground scrambles, but other than that, I mean, the first fight I took him down like 5 or 6 times and created some damage on the ground, and he won that fight. So I was like, well, I don't know what they're trying to judge. So I changed it to a stand-up battle for the second fight, and And that fight was more calculated on my end, but really the only difference was me controlling the cage and taking the center of the cage and making the difference that way with my striking. But I feel that I mix it up well enough to where I'm completely, I don't like to say well-rounded, because I feel like that means you're just you're okay at everything. I feel like I've pretty much come to the point of being able to do everything very well. And that's kind of the point I've gotten to now, is where I'm trying to sharpen every little thing to keep all my tools sharp. And I've tried to work on more submissions now, and guys know that my wrestling is really good, so they try to defend the shot. And then once they realize that my hands are super heavy and I have decent boxing, they try to wrestle me, and then that goes right into my wheelhouse. And then they realize that my submission game is pretty good. I mean, I'm a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, and
Okay.
you could probably argue that I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu the way I use my wrestling. But when it comes down to an actual fight, there's different layers to the way you use things. And I feel like I'm using everything in the perfect way where it's not predictable at all.
Hey, appreciate that information, man. You know, you're a brown belt. Who is your professor, BJJ professor? You know, who
Casey Halstead with 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. His black belt is from Eddie Bravo, who also gave Joe Rogan his black belt. So, I mean, I wouldn't consider myself necessarily the style of a 10th Planet guy, like a Tony Ferguson type guy or something like that. But I utilize the MMA grappling that Coach Casey has taught me over the last 2 years. And, you know, he's done a really great job, and he's a really good coach of the MMA grappling game. There's a lot of people who can teach jiu-jitsu at a high level, but being able to teach jiu-jitsu for MMA and those gray areas against the fence or on the mat against the fence, or the transitions from the takedowns, that's something that not very many people are good at. And Coach Casey's really good at that. And also I have another jiu-jitsu coach, Ricardo Almeida, in New Jersey, and he fought in the UFC for years, the judge for the UFC. I mean, he knows his stuff too. So I have both of those guys to be able to teach me, and that's kind of why I'm jumping levels on the ground.
And that's amazing. I totally agree with you, man. I was watching your fight with Silent. He had you in the north and south at one point. You were so calm and composed. You know what I'm saying? You could tell it on your face. You knew what you was doing.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about the Eddie Bravo toolage, right? I really don't see you. Most of his students do apply mission control. Exactly. You know, the rubber guard, so to speak. And that's sort of what Silent was trying to do to you.
Yeah,
but it didn't work. You know what I'm saying? But man, that's amazing that your professors under that toolage. That's something great to know. Now heading into the 2019 there, Lance, do you think everybody was coming for your head, you know, for you to go in there and repeat as champion? I know you've been champion in WSOF and then now the PFL for the tournament style. Did you think your competitor was coming at you a bit more, you know, aggressively this time around?
Yeah, I've kind of had a target on my back since I started to succeed in wrestling, though, as like a 12-year-old kid winning national tournaments. And I'm used to that type of attitude coming from contenders, basically. But going into a new season, everything starts from scratch, just like a new wrestling season for the NCAA. And I knew that you have to prove that you're the best again. So it's not defending something. You're proving again that you're the best. Just like the New England Patriots, I always use them as an example just because they've won so many rings. And every year when they come back and do it again, you're just like, they just prove that they're the best. And it's not that they're defending something. They're going out and taking it again. And that's how I look at it. I look at it as going out and taking it instead of trying to defend it.
Man, I totally appreciate watching you the second time around. It was funny. You know, my comrade, my brother in arms, your neighbor, right?
Yeah.
He was saying, hey, my neighbor is in the mixed martial arts. I say, who is he? What's his name? You know, I probably seen him, right? Somewhere competing on TV. He said, I got to find out. So when he told me your name, I say, man, you know, he just won the tournament, right? He's like, what tournament? I said, the PFL. So that's when he started getting a little bit more, attentive to who you were as a fighter, man. And and I truly appreciate you giving me the interview because it's a small world. Me and him served together, and you just happen to be his neighbor. So I appreciate you stopping in for the interview. But
I appreciate your guys' service. He's awesome, man. He's a great neighbor. He's a great friend. We'll stand in the driveway and talk for a while, and I can tell that he's more into the boxing side of things, but I think we're starting to sway him a little bit into watching MMA, and he's starting to learn a little bit of the people's names and following it a little bit more. So it's pretty cool to see. I mean, we live in a cul-de-sac, and all of the people that live in the cul-de-sac in the 2018 season when I first moved in here, they were all very interested because they're like, what does this guy do? Like, I'm always out of town for a certain amount of time, then I come back for a little bit, and people started to realize, and maybe it was through Facebook friendship or something, where they realized that I was a fighter. And so all of them started tuning into my fights and started supporting me. And when they see me out in the front yard, they're like, oh, when's your next fight? Like, it's cool to see that in a community of people that are not MMA. They're not MMA fans. I mean, they literally just watch it because they know that their neighbor's a fighter. So it's really cool to see that.
A multi-time champion too. So, what I'm saying? I mean, that's part of the accolades also, man.
It's hard to do. I mean, doing it one time was hard. Doing it the second time I think it was harder mentally because I put a little more pressure on myself, but I'm just having fun. It's when you do what you love and you're having fun doing it and you're learning every day, it's really not that stressful. The stress is always going to be there. Even if you have a regular job, your stress is going to be there just to get tasks done every day or deal with a boss you don't like or something. So I enjoy what I do. And like I said in the beginning, I always bet on myself no matter what. So I have fun doing it, and I trust my decisions, and it's been fun. So however much longer I get to do this, and as long as my body holds up and I stay healthy, it's a blessing.
Hey, absolutely. That's true words, man. What do you have to say to the casual MMA fans that only time they actually relate to mixed martial arts is when it's the UFC, what I'm saying, and Bellator? What's your words as a multi-time champion in a neighboring organization to those fans to come and tune in to PFL?
I would say to tune in just because the format's so different. There's more on the line every single fight because your regular season fights, you have to win or get a finish to create points to set yourself up in the 8-person bracket for the playoffs. And it's different from Bellator and UFC because you know that you have to win your entire way to get there. You can't just be a 6 ranked person in the organization and say, hey, I want to fight the champ because this or that, and then somehow they build this giant thing to where they fight for the belt when they really don't deserve it. In this, you don't get to talk to get what you think you deserve. You just have to go out there and win and make it happen. And that's the biggest thing that I think makes it entertaining is you get to follow a fighter throughout the entire season and kind of become a fan of that fighter, whoever it may be, or multiple fighters because there's multiple weight classes going on at the same time. And I think that's what's cool about it. In the UFC and Bellator, you get to see a fighter fight maybe 2 or maybe 3 times a year at the most. So when they're not fighting, the casual fan will be like, oh, man, I can't wait till that person fights again. It's like they have a 600-person roster and you're only worried about one person fighting. Like, it's hard to tell people what to do, but you have to kind of, if you're going to be a MMA fan, you have to embrace all types of fighting. And that's what it comes down to. And I think PFL brings something unique to the table, and there's all the different types of fighters in PFL. And it's just such a wide variety of backgrounds from sambo, judo, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, boxing, kickboxing. I mean, there's so many different ranges and so many matchups that you get to see in a 7-month period of time that you don't get to see that in other organizations in that small period of time.
And Lance, it's no restriction on how many times that you can compete in a tournament at all, is it?
No, I mean, as long as I'm healthy and as long as PFL is still writing that big check, I'm still going to compete. So, I mean, it's great. It's great for the sport, and there's no sign of PFL slowing down. It's actually getting better every season. So it's exciting. More higher competition every year. Better sponsorships and endorsements. The TV deal with ESPN last year was a huge difference from NBC Sports. So there's a lot of different things that are just elevating every year, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
And speaking of the paychecks there, Lance, you know, after all the energy, man, I know the adrenaline was running after you won your second championship and your first. You know, what was something I heard you mention that you bought the red dot, you know, Hellcat or whatever. Yeah. Have you had the opportunity to take it out, man, and see what it's all about?
Oh yeah, I bought that. I bought the red eye last January.
Okay.
And it's been a fun ride, man. It's I've always wanted a Lamborghini, and this was something that my wife is like, still to this day, even after the second championship, she's like, "You're not buying a Lamborghini. They're too expensive. They're a waste of money. This and that." It's like, at some point, I'm gonna have a Lamborghini, even if I just lease one for a year or two, just because, in my opinion, it's always been my dream car, and in my opinion, I've earned that. For now, we don't have kids. We don't have to worry about any extra bills. Like, I'll sell the red eye to get a Lamborghini. So that's where I'm at with that. But I love the Hellcat red eye. It's an awesome car, but Perry probably hates it because it's loud as hell when I wake him up in the morning.
Hey, that's good. He need that wake up. Now he retired. You know what I'm saying? He need to know how to wake up and get up, man. Yeah, a couple more questions for you. Your dad. You know, what were some words that he had for you once you won the tournament, man? Because your dad been around you from the test of time. You know what I'm saying? He's seen your growth in the sport of wrestling, multi-sports rather, all the way up to now that you becoming a multi-time champion. What is something that he said that stood out to you, man?
I think it's just, we have kind of an understanding that he knows my mentality, and he knows that he never really had to push me too hard because I knew how to do that on my own, and I'm so disciplined on my own. And his main thing was that he was just proud of me for being able to, he's like, he just can't believe fighting twice in one night, and everything, being able to fight and win 5 fights in 7 months to get to that point. And it's kind of like, without him, he's not really somebody who gets super emotional about stuff like that, but I know that he's super proud of me about it. And he just, when we talked about it after the first championship, it was just, he was just happy as can be, because I avenged my last loss, you know, in the semifinals of that. And then I beat Seiler in the final, and just having the success of that year, and just being able to stay humble and keep my head down and win another title in 2019 against tougher competition, to be honest. So he's just happy. He's happy with the way things are going for me. And when my career first started, I was making no money. I was living in California, mowing lawns and teaching private wrestling lessons to try and get by. And from going there in 2011 to being here in 2020, it's a wild ride. You can do whatever you want if you believe in something. You put your mind to it. There's nothing stopping you except yourself.
Man, that's so commendable, man. Once again, salute to you for the hard work and dedication and getting to this point, man. You know, speaking of California, what is your team, man? You know, what gym you train out of?
So the last year I've been training in New Jersey with Coach Mark Henry and Ricardo Almeida. And the big fighters there are Frankie Edgar, Eddie Alvarez, Corey Anderson, Zabit Magomedsharipov. So I have a whole list of guys that are in there that are tough as nails, and we have a bunch of up-and-coming guys too. So I made the switch there about a year ago, but it's a gym that I've wanted to train at since I started fighting, basically.
Man, salute to those guys you just mentioned, man. I know Eddie Alvarez, he's been a champion in every division he's been in. You know what I'm saying? And, of course, the Answer Edgar, one of the guys at one point in time, in my opinion, had the best hands in the UFC.
100%.
You know, especially for a fight, you know. and Corey Anderson is trying to come back up, and get the tough competition. But salute to him. But on the way out there, Lance, how do you see this 2020 tournament going for you, man? How do you feel
for it? I think it's obviously I'm confident to be able to get back to the finals again, but I take it one fight at a time. I have my first fight May 21st, and I only focus on the fight ahead of me. And I know there's tough competition coming in this year that they just signed, and there's some guys that they're going to be announcing, I think, that are going to give some good competition to the division. And all the other divisions in PFL, they've been signing ex-UFC fighters and Bellator fighters and people who think that they can make a run at it. So the best thing that can happen for me is guys in those organizations feeling like I'm not worthy enough to be the champ here, so they sign here so I can prove that I'm really the best 145er in the world.
Oh, is that their mentality? Okay. DBMA said, salute. What up, guy? You a beast. Glad you implemented that stand up with your already strong ground game. People been sleeping on your heavy hands.
Awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate it. I work every day at it. And Coach Mark Henry he's the man, and he's the one he's been making huge strides with me over the last year.
Hey, once again, thanks for the pleasure of interviewing you there, champ. I look forward to seeing you step back in the cage once again, man, and three-peat. You know what I'm saying? That's what the goal is, right? $1 million payday. Why not? So salute to your family, man, and your team and everything. Much success going in there and repeating as the PFL featherweight champion, the one and only Lance the Party Palmer.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. It was really good talking to you, and hope to talk to you after I get this win in May.
All right. Salute, champ. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Have a good one. Those of you that tuned in late, appreciate it. That was multi-time champ, WSOF champ, and also the active current Professional Fight League champ, mixed martial arts. I'm glad I was able to talk to him because I learned some more that I didn't know exactly about him as a fighter, and also the rules that the tournament style have in the Professional Fight League. Like I mentioned to him, a lot of MMA fans that are casual don't follow the sport often. You say you have a mixed martial artist, and then the first thing they gravitate to is the UFC. But you have so many neighboring branches that's out there in mixed martial arts. And I like how they're switching up the format, especially in the PFL, because you're not going to sit up here and select your opponent. It's a tournament-based competition, and you have to go in there and stay healthy, like you said, compete, win, and make it to the finals. And of course, in the finals, man, when you have $1 million as the grand prize, who wouldn't want to have extra motivation to go in there and win that prize? And also, you're the champion. You're the champion, man. And, I'm looking forward to see who's going to be bleeding over into this tournament style fighting. You have some fighters that fight Bellator, UFC, wherever they're fighting at, they may be used to going in fight camp, stepping into the cage, competing, and then jumping out. In this particular tournament, you have a short turnaround, and then like he mentioned, you might fight more than once in a month. In a day. You know what I'm saying? And then come back for the championship. So fight more than once in a day. You definitely have to stay healthy. And if you want to know what that's like, turn back to the old K1 days, man. Like, turn back to the Grand Prix. Turn back to those days when those fighters was actually damaged. Like every strike you can imagine was allowed back then. And it was a brutal freaking competition. Brutal tournament style competing for you to try to go in there and prove that you was the baddest man on that night. But kudos to him, man. It's a long freaking ride. I was I knew who he was from watching the tournament, but the crazy thing is he lived right next door to a good friend of mine, man, that served, me and him served in the Marine Corps together. And it's funny. He say, my neighbor fights. And I say, fight what? He say, man, he's a fighter, you know, from what I understand, you know, he goes out the fight camp all the time. So I was like, man, what's his name, man? Who is it? He said, I have to, he told me the first part, but he just didn't really know. So when he told me, I say, do you know who he is now? You know, and no, I said, man, dude is a champion, you know, dude is legit. He won $1 million, you know, out of this tournament. He's like, oh, okay. And I've asked him months ago, you know what I'm saying? I said, hey, can you just give him, you know, World Combat Sports so I can get an interview? And he just let it ride, man. I say, bro, you have to touch bases with them while the coal is hot, because he just won a tournament. The man is like a two-time PFL champion. You don't want to wait to 2020 and, you know, like talk about a championship that happened in December. So you want to get it while it's hot. So I thank him for that, man. Salute to you, Perry. I appreciate it. Salute to Lance Palmer, man. Very, how you put it, he might be one of those guys that can walk around in public and you just don't know who he is. But he is absolutely a technical assassin in there. Very, very technical skills when it comes to his boxing, the way he can kind of conceal his takedown, the way he throws his punches and then go in for that strict double leg. I mean, it's hard to even stuff that double leg that he has. He may go to his left all the time, but guess what? You can't stop it. And then when he gets you on the ground, it's not the old school, you know, lay and pray, stay in the guard. He's actually passing. He's actually advancing and transitioning to a better position. If you look at his fight in 2018, when he was fighting Steven Siler, he had far wrist control of his opponent, Siler, around the back of his back, and he was landing punches with his left hand. That isn't as easy as you think. You know, even when he was in the north-south choke, you know, all the areas that consist of his fight game in general, he is displayed. He's shown that he can go to the body with the kicks. He's shown that he has punches. You know, his wrestling helps him in the clinch, you know what I'm saying, with good takedown defense. And then once he's on the ground, he's not just laying in the guard. He's actually using his jiu-jitsu, passing, transition, advancing to a better position. And also, you know, in the last several fights, man, he's basically shown his fans that he has a submission game. Like, he said he always had a submission game, but now he's basically delegating that inside the cage, man. I mean, that shit is crucial. You got a wrestler with his pedigree, as much as he's wrestled in the past, bleed that over into a jiu-jitsu game. I mean, I'm talking about technically sound jiu-jitsu. You bleed the wrestling over with jiu-jitsu, and you take the mindset that he has to kind of play around with whatever he chooses to, and he really doesn't get reckless with it. Like, he used every bit of it as if he's teaching. You know, he's showing you what his skill set is about. And that's what make a fighter different than the rest, man. When you go up here and see them fight in the cage, you see them get put in adversity, and you see them place their opponents in adversity. And the way that they work themselves through it, it's a beautiful art to watch, man. Seriously, it's a beautiful art to watch. And you know, I'm glad they don't allow elbows in there. And I see the reason why, because it's a tournament style. You know, they don't want a fighter having a cut. He win the fight and then he can't come back because he got a huge gash over his head. So no elbows allowed, which opens it up to, which opens the opponents up to do a bit more of grappling, you know, punches, you know, in the top position or from the bottom. You know, you still can knee. I think a part of the interview, he said that he couldn't understand why knees were allowed, because knees cut you open too. You know, you get hit with a knee in the head, you're gonna get split open if you get it good enough. You know, if it impacts nice and clean, you might get cut open. DBMA said WCS great platform. It's a balance of boxing and MMA, perfect blend. Not too many doing this, especially on YouTube. Yeah, true words, man. Appreciate that word of encouragement. And I can't just give up MMA, man, because MMA is a freaking beautiful art, multifaceted in its form. And really, the way MMA has evolved from the time that Gracie came in here with UFC 1 wearing a gi that nobody else had, but they wore it because it was a weapon. They was able to go in there and choke fighters out to the point where, you know, fighters wouldn't even think about wearing a gi into the cage. You know what I'm saying? Looking back at it, the whole evolution of the skill set has evolved for mixed martial arts, man. You just don't have the Matt Hughes coming in here with wrestling, the GSPs. You know, it's really turned full circle. Even with jiu-jitsu, right? You have to have jiu-jitsu along with some type of wrestling, added to that. You have to know how to execute jiu-jitsu, know what the hell you're looking at. Like, jiu-jitsu is an art that you can't fake. It's so tough, man. Jiu-jitsu is just an enigma in itself because you have to actually know how to set your opponents up. It's a submission game. It's not a tip for, what they call it, a pity pat game. You're basically trying to set your opponent up for a better position. You know, especially when it comes to mixed martial arts, you're able to throw strikes and set your opponent up for submissions. You know, so that in itself, man, is amazing. But check your boy out, Lance the Party Palmer, man. He said he'll be back in the cage in May. You know, some of his stablemates that he mentioned, Eddie Alvarez. Eddie Alvarez has been a champion in every organization he's competed in, from my understanding. Underground King. You know, he was the lightweight champion at one point in time in the UFC. And we all know that Conor McGregor was able to defeat him in that bout. I believe he stopped him in round 4. I'm not sure. But Eddie Alvarez has been in some freaking legendary fights, man. Legendary freaking fights, man. And, you know, Corey Anderson, he's coming up. Very tough dude. I know at one point in time he was calling out John Jones, but he's really putting his skill set together. You know, don't sleep on Corey Anderson, man. You know, he's coming together. All he needs is another good fight, and we're going to see him somewhere close to getting the call up, man. We just got to wait. You know what I'm saying? We just got to wait and see what that is. And then, of course, Frankie the Answer Edgar, man, I don't want to say he's on the back end of his career. The man's been at the top. The man is one of the legends of freaking the UFC, period. For his height and his skill set, you want to talk about a guy with his height and stature, the way he has technically elite wrestling along with his boxing skills. I mean, dude is tough as I don't know what, man. You've seen the fights with him and Maynard. I mean, he's been in there with some of everybody, to be honest. You know, some of everybody. I'm not going to lie. So salute to the team, man. Mark Henry, too, man. Don Dollar says, salute, fam. World Combat Sports. Great interview. I appreciate it, man. This is mixed martial arts. You know, I was stoked to get the interview, man, because, you know, especially from a fighter whose skill set is on the elite level. And you look at his fights, go to PFL on YouTube. He was a 2018 and 2019 champion of the Professional Fight League. And also, they just included on the women's side of the house in the division, the UFC only goes up the featherweight division. But from my understanding, I believe that they have a 155-pound division over there. I believe that Harrison, the Olympian, she's the champion in that division right now, I believe. But in the UFC, the highest female division is 145 right now, and that's featherweight. So if you take that division And look at, even in the men's division, there's no 155 pounds. You know, in the men's division is 145 featherweight, 155 lightweight. And then there's a jump. At one point in time, they was talking about, well, why don't we make an atom weight? You know, why don't we throw a weight class in between 155 and 170? Let's throw that 165 pound division in there. But the PFL throw the 155 up in there. So, hey, you know, I mean, why not? The UFC can't do that because they just don't have enough female personnel that can compete even at featherweight right now. You know what I'm saying? Amanda Nunes, man, she's the champ. 135 bantamweight and the featherweight. So it's no need for them to freaking open up a 155 pound division. But for the guys, the males, the men that competing, right? I believe it would be beneficial for them to open up that 165 pound division, you know, a 155, whatever the case, because it allows guys who just a little bit too big to compete at lightweight and a little bit too small to compete at welterweight. They can compete in that average right there. They can split it in the middle and compete at that 165 pound division. DBMA say, yeah, I remember the Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, the killer days, no weight class. Man, those were killers right there you just mentioned, man. You know, Ken Shamrock, come on, man. The Lions Den, freaking Gracie. You know, the Gracie's the one that basically organized the first UFC. And it was more so benefited to them wearing the gi because that's what they had trained jiu-jitsu in, BJJ. And being that Art came from a Japanese jiu-jitsu, they formed it into their own style of jiu-jitsu and then brought it to the UFC. So, of course, the Gracie clan, man, was just legendary. The way they came in there and was able to submit bigger guys. And the rest is history, man. You know, the rest is history. It didn't stay as long as people thought it would because the sport had to get on board with BJJ. They had to. They had to change up the rules a little bit to go in there and compete. You had to. And then Dan Severn, I'm not even going to get on Dan Severn. Dan Severn, man, I wish it was a guy like him fighting today. A wrestler. You know what I'm saying? You know, that's sort of like Lance Palmer. He's sort of like a Dan Severn. It's a wrestling pedigree behind him. But in my opinion, his all-around skill set is just years ahead of what Dan Severn was doing back then. Dan Severn was a very dominating wrestler. You know what I mean? He had hands, but he was a big, tough wrestler, strong, and he had some great success in the UFC. He's a legend of the UFC, real talk. You know what I'm saying? He was not to be messed with. But you're absolutely right, DBMA, for real. But this is his interview, y'all. I'm not going to stay on that long. I had to get on here for this interview. Man, when I get interviews like that from elite fighters, that's what I'm looking for. You know what I'm saying? Because, you know, he told me something I didn't know about the PFL. And then you get to learn a lot more about the mindset of these fighters and what they done went through. You know, that's what it's all about. So salute everyone that tuned in, man. Be sure to follow me on all social media. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as always. Hit the dang follow button on IG. And once again, boxing, MMA. Much success and shout out to Lance the Party Palmer, man. 22-3. He is the two-time Professional Fight League champion in mixed martial arts. Absolutely no doubt about it. He stayed right next to my good friend, man, that we served in the Marine Corps with, man. Shout out to Perry. Shout out, man. Thanks for then dropping that info for me. Real talk. DBMA say, yeah, I remember the Gracies, Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, the killer days, no weight class. I mean, I read that. I thought you put another comment. But yeah, for sure. Y'all stay tuned, man. The fight's coming on later on with Showtime. You know, as I mentioned, the local fighter down here, Brian Norman Jr., 16-0, 14 knockouts. He's going to be on deck fighting on Showtime I'm looking forward to that fight. And of course, it's accessible. Whoever has Showtime, you can look it up. But I'm showing support because he's a local fighter, man. He's a rising star in the game of boxing. So of course, some of you may not be familiar with him, but that's what I'm here for. World Combat Sports Media. I'm gonna try to put his name out there some more and give more people a little bit more optics, info. You know what I'm saying? Try to bring more attention to this fighter. Be sure to turn up and tune in to World Combat Sports. Salute.